Welcome back to WAHNcast, the podcast of the Women's Affordable Housing Network. I'm Angie Truitt with the National WAHN Board, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by my co-host, Mark Shelburne, housing policy consultant and Democratic, National WAHN Board member, and professor at UNC Chapel Hill.
Thanks, Angie. Always great to be here. Today's episode brings together two impressive leaders who are shaping the national conversation around housing and homelessness from very different but connected perspectives.
We are honored to welcome Dr. Gregg Colburn, associate professor at the University of Washington's Ronstadt Department of Real Estate. Gregg is a leading researcher on housing affordability and homelessness, and his new book, Affordable Housing in the United States, dives into the policies and structural factors shaping the crisis. Many of you may also know his widely acclaimed co-authored work, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, which challenged a lot of conventional thinking on this issue.
And also joining us from the field is Emila Sutton, Director of Housing and Neighborhoods for the City of Raleigh, North Carolina. And also I have to mention co-worker of NC President Annie Bauman-Mitchell. So Emila brings boots on the ground policy lens for leadership in addressing unsheltered homelessness and affordable housing access in a growing city is both innovative and compassionate. She's been at the forefront of community-based strategies to bring neighbors home and elevate dignity in housing.
Today, we're diving into the intersection of research, local practice, and national policy. We'll explore what the data shows, what cities like Raleigh are doing right now, and how we, through WAHN and beyond, can be part of the movement to ensure everyone has a place to call home. So let's jump in.
Very good. And we can ask both of you, maybe start with Emila. What first drew you to work on housing and homelessness issues, and what keeps you motivated in this space?
Yeah, so I all along thought that I was going to be an attorney like yourself, and really became much more interested in how policy impacts people's everyday lives, and had some jobs working in administrative at the policy level, and really felt like I needed to understand day-to-day impact better. And so I started off as an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer 20 years ago in Tucson, Arizona, working at a transitional housing facility. And it was really eye-opening and really helped solidify my understanding of how housing undergirds all things, right? And it helps all aspects of a person's life. And so became really interested in that and wanted to continue on. Eventually did go to law school, which that, has served me really well in this role. But now it's just really exciting to be able to serve at the local level and have influence and impact over the way programs and policies are shaped.
Emila, it's great to see you, and thank you, Angie and Mark, for having us. I'm a second career academic, and so I had a first career in finance, and I didn't do anything about housing except I did get involved in it a little bit, and that's what piqued my interest. I tell two short stories about what lit the fire for me. One was I was living in New York City. I was an investment banker in the mid-'90s. And there was this guy named Giuliani who was mayor. You may remember this person. He had a career before his most recent career. And he was cleaning up New York. And I remember I lived on the Upper West Side and would take the subway downtown to Wall Street where I worked. And it was not uncommon to see someone sleeping on the subway who was likely experiencing homelessness. And, a stop would come and cops would come on and grab these people out of a dead sleep and drag them off and away they went. And it was kind of hard to watch because obviously you can imagine someone grabbing you out of your bed in the middle of the night, the look of fear on their face. And I was like, oh, well, this is what cleaning up New York means, which is to make it more pleasant for me, who lives in Manhattan and works here, and for tourists. And so that didn't sit real well with me. And then I moved to Chicago, and the investment firm that I worked for sponsored a Little League baseball team in Cabrini Green. And this was as the towers were coming down in the late 90s. And so for 2 summers, I coached Little League baseball in Cabrini Green. And the teams were shrinking in size because families were being moved to the South Side, Robert Taylor homes, et cetera. And so we kind of had a front row seat to the demolition of, one of the most famous public housing projects in the United States. And as a white kid from the suburbs of Minneapolis, this was a radically different experience than I had growing up. And so that was really, really eye-opening. And so ultimately, when I made the transition to go to school, I knew I wanted to get my PhD in public policy and decided to focus on housing. And one thing led to another. And then I landed in Seattle, which is, an epicenter of a housing crisis. And so I've just been thrown into the deep end, and here I am.
Well, Gregg, I saw you speak. I heard your Cabrini Green story when you spoke at IHC a couple of Februarys ago. And what I took away from you were talking about the Homelessness is a Housing Problem book and all the data. And I left feeling very inspired by that. So your research explores a lot of the structural drivers of homelessness. What's one key myth about homelessness that you wish more people understood?
what I hope that people take from the book is there are all sorts of individual attributes that can certainly increase the risk of homelessness for any of us. Drug use, mental illness, poverty, discrimination, physical disability, you name it. And that's all true. But that's not the reason why our coastal cities have a lot more homelessness. The reason Seattle has so much homelessness is our housing is really, really unaffordable. And there's not much of it, or not enough of it. And then when you layer really tight housing markets on top of individual vulnerability, that's who we then see on the street on 3rd Avenue in Seattle. And so people equate that sometimes powerful and fearful experience of interacting with someone experiencing homelessness who might be in crisis with that's the cause. And it's reasonable to assume that. But as we demonstrate in the book, it's certainly an individual reason why that person might be there, but it's not why Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, DC have so much more homelessness. So I think that's fundamentally what I hope that people walk away with. And if you buy that argument that we make, then that says to us as civic leaders, elected leaders, people who care about this, we should at least be devoting some time and energy on that issue of creating more housing. Doesn't mean we shouldn't treat. Of course, treatment is an important response to these challenges, but we have to have some of our energy, financial, political, et cetera, devoted towards housing, or I fear we'll never get out of this.
To go to Emila, you can describe how your pilot initiative fits and is implementing what Gregg is talking about there and how to solve homelessness.
I spend a lot of my time actually citing Gregg's work and quoting Gregg's work, and it's been extremely helpful in helping us and our community frame out this issue and this work and what needs to happen. One of the things that we talk a lot about is the connection between housing and homelessness. And just to refer back to what Gregg was saying too, I think when you look at this issue as if it's an individual issue, your solutions are individual focused and it's not focused on the right thing, right? So for example, if you believe, which I would say majority of people do in this community at least, that homelessness is caused by substance use and mental health issues, again, these are triggering factors. These are things that make people more vulnerable to homelessness. But if you believe that is the core issue, then you believe that treating someone substance use issues while they're experiencing homelessness or mental health issues while they're experiencing homelessness is an effective solution, when in fact it's not. And not only is that ineffective because someone can't heal and get well while living in the trauma state of experiencing homelessness, it's also more expensive than actually housing someone. And so we talk a lot about that and how providing housing and support services, specifically case management, to a person is around $24,000 per person per year, whereas someone experiencing homelessness costs taxpayers around up to, we talked to Houston quite a bit this past year, and their figure is more in the $96,000 per person per year range. And so we live in a really amazing state of time here where the solution is housing, and not only is that the most effective option, but it happens to also be the most efficient, affordable. So, we like to say, if you care about efficiency, we've got the solution for you. If you care about people, we've got the solution for you, and it's the same one. So one of the things that we're doing in the city of Raleigh is addressing unsheltered homelessness with a direct-to-housing model. And this has proven to be extremely successful in many other cities. Houston, Dallas have housed thousands of people doing this. New Orleans, Chattanooga, there are just a lot of cities that are employing this tactic. And so we wanted to show the community that this is the way to end unsheltered homelessness. And so we started this pilot where we're providing housing assistance directly to folks paired with case management. We have successfully decommissioned one encampment where 45 households were living. Pretty much everyone in the pilot at this point has a housing plan or is housed. And the 45 households includes 66 people, 15 children. So we've been able to provide housing solutions to those folks who were formerly living outside. Not only have we reunited families through this and provided safe, stable housing that will impact their lives and generations ahead, but we have also, seen health conditions dramatically improve in a short amount of time. Families reunite. It's been really incredible.
Gregg, I heard in Emila, you just shouted out Houston a couple of times. Gregg specifically mentioned Houston when I saw him at IHC. So have you guys found it successful sharing what you've been able to do, all of the different perspectives coming in, and are more local governments and local players jumping on board now that you've demonstrated some success in these programs?
I will just say, I've been to a lot of cities and been fortunate to be gone to Raleigh as well. And it was fun to meet Emila and the team there. What I see is a lot of really smart, engaged people who are interacting well and trying to understand what's working and what isn't. And so, your first question, which I didn't answer very well, which is what keeps you motivated? It's me showing up in a community and seeing really sharp, committed people using evidence to make a difference. And it's not easy. If it were easy, we would have taken care of it. But that really gives me a lot of hope. What I always say to people is we're having these debates about stuff, and I'd much rather be in a debate when the vast majority of evidence, if not all the evidence, is on my side. And that's the case here. We're still fighting about it, but the evidence is on our side. The one challenge we have around the country is the vastly different contexts. And so what I say to folks in Seattle is the Houston playbook is wonderful. That will probably not work quite as well in Seattle as it did in Houston or Chattanooga. And so what we need to figure out is a city that's situated like Houston or Chattanooga or Milwaukee is in a different place than Boston or Seattle or San Francisco. And so we do need context-specific examples of success. And that's, I think, where we've struggled a little bit, is that a lot of the places that have had really significant success have had more accommodating housing markets, which has been one input into their success. It's not the only input. It's taken coordination, public-private, multiple mayors in a row. That's why these communities have had success, and they actually had some housing in which to place people. That's really the barrier we've had in Seattle, is we get benefits from DC emergency rental assistance. We can't use it. There's just not places to put people. So there is a lot of great sharing going on, and that gives me hope. And, I'd like to just see a few more shining examples of success on the coast. That's what we're hoping for right now.
I'll just pull out something too that I think also goes back to Gregg's research, and something that, Mark, I know you talk a lot about to local leaders, national leaders, about how zoning and regulations directly impact your homelessness crisis, right? And so how much control a local government has over those things and how the decisions they make can directly impact homelessness. And in Raleigh, we're doing a lot of work and have for a number of years, way before I was here. We have really strong leadership around understanding that connection and the importance of deregulation and the part that zoning plays in either inhibiting or allowing for affordable housing production. And again, this just goes back to the importance of being able to tie all of these decisions together and help people understand how they're tied together. In Raleigh, our situation is such that we have had a lot, because of the really great decision-making that has happened and leadership through elected officials, as well as, departmental local leadership around zoning, is allowing for a lot of multifamily housing production to happen at all levels. And that has allowed us to, right now, at this point in time, have some breathing room at the vacancy rate. So, we have an opportunity right now to really house folks. And I think we need to do that, and we need to do it quickly, and we need to scale what we've already done. And again, it's cost savings. We know it works. I would say too, it's ending homelessness. It's not a mystery. We know how to do it. We know how much it will cost. We just got to look at like Gregg said, local context and all the different pieces that are on the table. And then you just figure it out, right? You have the basic tenets of what needs to happen.
Yeah, it really is hard for people to get their head around the reality that preventing, quote, luxury condos makes homelessness worse, but it just does. And we won't take all the time to explain it right now, or although y'all certainly could, but that is the reality that's hard for folks to accept. So if we'll stick with Emila for a second, and so go back to your previous local government experience, you had a similar job for a smaller community down the road, and I remember you did multiple innovative things there. I'll ask you to pick one out to talk about, but the one that I remember had to do with tenancy supports and helping people stay in their homes.
We did all the things over there in Orange County, North Carolina. It was really great to be a part of that work, and we had really fantastic municipal partners in that. The top thing I think that I walked away with was creating a clear pathway for people experiencing homelessness and a referral pipeline to housing choice vouchers. I was also the public housing agency director there and was able to really build in a lot of flexibilities that HUD encourages in order to allow for more people to take advantage of housing choice vouchers. And so we were able to house, I think the total number ended up being around 200 people. So you can imagine in a smaller community, the impact of that was pretty huge. And then we were able to provide some additional funding to provide some of those tenancy supports to make sure that people are supported ongoing. That's the thing that's really necessary, right? It's not just the rental assistance, it's that ongoing support piece that's really key. So I'm glad you brought that up, Mark. And, in our pilot too, we're making sure that we have that intensive case management available to people. Again, it's voluntary, right? Because we also know that people do better when they're not required to do something based on their tenancy or participation in a program. People just have better outcomes when they're able to choose. And we've found that everyone has chosen to engage, and it's really been exciting to see.
Gregg, how do you think national data can better inform local policy, and where's the disconnect in understanding what you guys are talking about? And this is a problem that can be solved. You've got the research, you've got the data. Like Emila said, you sit down and just figure it out. Why do you think that that's not being implemented everywhere? Or are big challenges? We mentioned zoning, obviously, is a huge one.
Well, I think, pointing the finger at the academy for a moment, I don't think we've done a very good job in communications, and this is true for a long time. We tend to write journal articles and books for other professors, and we all pat each other on the back. And so my book was actually a little bit risky. I went to my dean before and said, I want to write this, and I'm not going to write it for professors. I want to write it for someone who's just walking down the streets in Seattle. And she's cool and said, go for it. And ultimately, was rewarded. I was rewarded for taking that risk. And so I don't think we've done a very good job when we have great evidence of figuring out how to package that in a way that is accessible to the general audience. And in the absence of that, someone's going to walk down 3rd Avenue and see what's going on there and say, well, this is what I see. Why would I think anything else? And I don't blame people for reaching that conclusion. So to a certain extent, it's shame on us, those of us who do this, because we just haven't done a very good job. And I think the other thing that's powerful here is that these experiences that we have with people who are experiencing homelessness, especially West Coast cities, they're really powerful experiences. And so I can be standing there saying homelessness is a housing problem, and someone else is saying, I don't feel safe walking down the street. And there's this person behaving erratically, and I'm grabbing my kids. And I think it's natural then, kind of human reaction to say, like, that's what's going to stick in my craw, not Gregg's 10-minute podcast or whatever. And so we're kind of fighting those emotional experiences. And so I think we have to acknowledge that. Like, I don't want that for our streets. I'm uncomfortable at times. I don't want someone urinating outside the restaurant. Like, I totally understand that. We need to acknowledge that. And then also say, as Emila said, we know how to fix this. And what we haven't done is scale these solutions at a local or national level, and that's why we're struggling. So to me, I got invited to HUD in October, and we were talking about the next generation of housing policy. And my comment to Secretary Taubman, Acting Secretary Taubman, she took over after Secretary Fudge stepped down. I just said, the veteran homelessness case is arguably the best success we've had in housing policy in the last 25 years in the United States, and not enough people know about it. Because she was saying, what can we do at HUD? I said, I would hire a PR team and I would blast this big time. People need to understand this. And that's why I end with that story in every one of my talks, which is, you tell me housing isn't going to work. We just did it. We just cut veteran homelessness by 55%. Why? It's good politics. And we used the evidence-based interventions that we know work. And we had success. So I'm in conflict a little bit with some of my colleagues who want to keep doing more studies. And I studies are super important. But I think it has to be studies plus, because this is a prime example where the evidence is overwhelmingly on our side and we're losing. So I think it forces us to look in the mirror and say, well, we probably should do something different. We can't keep banging our head against the wall just repeatedly, because we're going to get the same result, I fear.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you mention that, because I have family members who are, one's an academic doctor, the other's a practitioner, and the doctor world, the practitioners are informed by the academics. And yet in our world, that doesn't really happen. And that's an unfortunate, and you think, well, that's life or death. Well, what we're doing is life or death too. And it's just, it's a little bit more removed. So people, I don't think, get the consequence of it, but it's been a frustration of mine, that separation between academic and practitioner for a long time. So question for both of you, how do you approach building partnerships across these sectors with researchers, developers, service providers, community leaders, et cetera?
Yeah, I think transparency and humility is really the way that I try and go about it. And holy moly, for this pilot, humility has just been at the forefront, because we have been humbled and we have learned a lot about our community and about our system and about what we should and shouldn't be doing and who we should and shouldn't be engaging. And so I think being really transparent is important. I think naming what the city can bring to the table and where we need others to lead. Again, with service providers, it's about respect, acknowledging the really hard and incredible work they're doing on the ground, and also reducing red tape for them. They really want to do what's best for folks, and a lot of times red tape makes it hard. And so with developers, I think it's about aligning incentives and making sure that we're on the same page. And then community partnerships, it's all about creating trust with residents, with leaders in your community, with people that are experiencing homelessness. Trust has been a huge part in our pilot, and we were really lucky to have incredible on-the-ground partners who had created relationships and trust through outreach and peer support already with people living in this particular encampment. And so, we were very careful with how we talked about the pilot, how we approached folks with this information. So trust is really, from soup to nuts, a really big part of it.
I agree with everything you just said. And it's interesting. We're launching a housing center called the Housing Future Center at the University of Washington right now. And so I'm heading up that effort. And so I've been spending a lot of time with community leaders. We're raising money, talking to elected leaders, policymakers, foundations, and you name it. And the three values that I've articulated for the center are: one, we're going to be pragmatic, because I think pragmatism is really important in these issues. Second, we're going to be rigorous. We're going to do good work. We're going to do good research. We're going to teach our students well. And our final word, which Emila just mentioned, is humility. There is not a silver bullet to this. There's not one answer to fix this. Many of these issues are complicated. We're not going to come and say this is written in granite. It's not like the 10 Commandments. It's like a lot of these issues are really challenging, and there are benefits and detriments to a lot of the decisions we make. And so approaching that with some humility, and then we're hoping to serve as a convener. And so we can bring people together and hopefully have a conversation around some of these contested topics that end up getting fought out in the Seattle Times, as opposed to just saying, we have a shared interest in more affordable housing. We understand there may be disagreement around rent stabilization. Let's talk about that. And unfortunately, that hasn't been happening. And so I do think just approaching it in that way, letting the evidence lead us, trying to be pragmatic and speak to what our shared goals are. Even the most free market developer that I talk to, they don't want homelessness. The Office of Housing in Seattle, they don't want this. And sometimes those two organizations fight, and that's okay. But in the big picture, we're all going in the same direction. We want people to be housed. How we get there might differ, but I kind of keep going back to that shared goal, because that's what can bring us together and hopefully bridge some of these divides. And the other point is like, we're not going to all agree on these issues all the time, and that's okay. The goal is not to convince you that A is right or B is right. That's just not the goal. So I think that approach and humility and pragmatism is super important.
You mentioned this a bit ago too, Gregg, about the image issue, because we know NIMBYism in affordable housing is huge. And the image problem, as you mentioned, nobody wants to be scared walking down a street, being concerned. So it's even worse with those that are unhoused. And I think humanizing people by telling their stories is such an integral part of what we need to do in housing, period, but especially with homelessness, because we see people and we judge them. We don't know their stories. We don't know what led to where they are. But I think that people in general are compassionate and they do care about their fellow humans. But at some point, we stopped seeing unhoused people as our neighbors. So, Gregg, what's been the most surprising thing to you about working at the intersection of homelessness and affordable housing? Because we're getting ready to lead into your new book here in a minute. So tell us a little bit about any kind of things that have shocked you or surprised you.
Well, what has interested me since I got into this was the huge chasm between homelessness and housing policy. It's true in the academy. I've had many people say, oh, no, I don't study homelessness. I study housing. Okay. And other people saying, oh, no, I study homelessness. I don't study housing. And so I joke that my mission is to bring these two worlds together because they're absolutely related. But what's interesting is when you go into the public sector, the same dichotomy exists. Historically speaking, where does homelessness happen? Health and Human Services. And then there's an Office of Housing that's thinking about housing, and those two organizations haven't been talking. And so we have these silos that should be tied much more closely together. So that has been really interesting. I think a lot of places are realizing that we should probably bring these together and have more conversations. So that's good, but it's taken probably longer than it should have. And so that's been kind of my own little mission in life, is to bring these two schools and practices together a little more closely. I don't know, Emila, if you've experienced that in your time.
I feel that. I mentioned it at the beginning, and this is where your work has really paid off and has really helped us and helped our conversation, because it bridges those two things and allows us to talk about those two things in a way that people understand that one directly impacts the other. And what we do with affordable housing and the choices that we make directly impacts homelessness. And so I completely feel that. I think the challenge is that those two silos don't speak the same language. And like with so many other things, it's really bridging that language. And I try really hard. It's my life's goal to be able to explain things in a way that's easily understood by both sides. And I think as you learn more and more about both of those silos, you're able to do that, I hope. But yeah, that's one of my goals too, is just to really bridge those two things.
Yeah, there really are two different languages and sets of assumptions. It's pretty remarkable. Having lived mostly in one, I see the other as being tremendously complex and mysterious. And so it's very important to bring the two together. Well, so since we're talking about books, I want to say congrats, Gregg, on your new one, Affordable Housing in the United States. I think if I get to teach the policy class, that's probably the one I'm going to assign for my students to read. So what inspired you to write this follow-up book? And does it build on the themes of your previous, homelessness is a housing problem?
I mean, it certainly builds on it, but it is an independent work. I wrote it with my colleague, Rebecca Walter, here at the University of Washington, and we had been talking about writing a textbook because we've created a lot of the curriculum for our own courses. There's some really good housing policy books that I use, that I teach from, but there haven't been affordable housing books. There have been a couple, but there hasn't been kind of a affordable housing 101. And so we were talking about it, and then coincidentally, we got an inquiry from a publisher saying, we would really like someone to write this book. Would you be interested? And we said, well, that seems like may as well do that. So it was completely reactive and was kind of the kick in the rear that we probably needed. And so put our heads together and kind of put an outline. And the idea for this book was, one, I'm using it in my affordable housing class. And so I taught it this winter term for the first time, which was fun. We also wanted to write it in a way that an elected leader, a policymaker who's new to the field, could pick it up and just say, I want to learn enough to be dangerous. And so I've had a lot of people who are deep in affordable housing saying, I can't wait to read your book. And I just say, save your money. You don't need to read it. You know what's in there. You don't need LIHTC 101 or what is a voucher or the history of housing policy in the United States or how do we define affordable housing. And so this is really meant for students who are new to the topic or people in public service who need an in-service. But we were purposeful to not make it a policy book. There's a lot of policy in it, but the point is that affordable housing is not synonymous with subsidized housing. That's a point that we make early in the book, that a lot of times we use those two as synonyms. But as we say, for Bill Gates, all housing is affordable. I currently live in affordable housing. It is affordable for my family, and it's unsubsidized. For some people, they live in subsidized housing. That's not affordable to them. It's still too expensive. And so the point really being that we need to talk about subsidy and affordability in different ways. We can have naturally occurring affordability, all that kind of stuff, and really kind of bringing in the market dynamics, showing historically what's happened, incomes and housing costs over time I spent a lot of time on that because I just don't think people realize until they look at the graph and say, oh, this is why I'm having such a hard time renting or buying a house. When my parents bought their first house in the 1970s, it was 3 or 4 times their income, and now it's 8 or 9 times their income. This is a totally different ballgame, and the answer is yes, it is. Anyway, that was the goal and the purpose of the book.
One quick follow-up on that. What's one chapter or case study you think will surprise readers the most without giving away, like, we still want everybody to go buy your book? But
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I don't know that anything is terribly surprising. Basically, we do kind of, the first part is all what's going on, describing affordable housing. We have 3 chapters on 3 cities. So we look at Seattle, Chicago, and San Antonio, just to say how do federal, state, and local policies come together to produce an environment. And they're very different market environments. And then the final chapter is maybe the one that I would highlight, which is my frustration with policy-oriented books is people do all this good work. They get to the final chapter and then say, this is what the world should look like. And then I read those chapters and say there is 0.0001% chance of this ever happening. And it's not that they aren't good ideas and they're beautiful and I would love to live in a world that looks like that, but they don't. And so I really wanted to center pragmatism in that final chapter. And so what Rebecca and I did was we talked about different states. Basically said status quo, modest change, more robust change, and then radical change. What would a housing system in the United States look like under those different scenarios? So I felt better about that because then people can kind of say, okay, one, we're not powerless in the status quo. There's still things we can do, especially at the state and local level if the feds aren't going to expand things. I think what will surprise people is we didn't really plan on retrenchment scenario, which is what we're facing right now. And so it was maybe a little naive without knowing where the election was going to go, that arguably we should have had another state, which is taking potentially a big step back from where we've been, which is woefully insufficient in my view. And so I think people might say, I think you missed something here. And I would readily concede, yes, we did, unfortunately.
In the book, you talk about both public and private sector actors addressing the crisis. So you have a local government person here. What do you want local governments and other listeners of the organization and from organizations like WAHN included to take away from your research?
We write about this in the book, and I mentioned this in the first book, that I think most of these problems are all hands on deck or everyone's in the boat type situation. And when you look at federal housing policy for low-income households, it's roughly 5% of households in the United States receive some subsidy, either through tax credits, vouchers, or public housing. And so when we start to think about housing in the United States and people say, well, I don't want to deal with greedy landlords or greedy developers, I'll say if we're 5 million units short in the United States, 95% of that housing is going to be built without any federal subsidy at all. And the consequence of not building that housing is immense. We're living with that consequence right now. And so you may not like capitalism. Fine, let's have that philosophical debate, but we need this housing tomorrow. And so the point is this is when I get accused of being a socialist and a shill for corporate interests, which I talk about this, that I want it to be easier, faster, and cheaper for private developers to build housing. And there's a role for local government to facilitate that, land use, regulation, the whole nine yards. And there's a role for government in ensuring that people can afford housing that might not be accessible to them right now. And that's where we're falling down. And so we can pull the regulatory and land use lever, and we can also pull the lever of we need more subsidy. That to me is the path. And so having developers at the table to me is incredibly important. I've been doing a lot of work in Seattle, and what has become clear to me is that there's a lot of people who are making really important decisions who have never built housing. And they'll admit that. They're not pretending to, but it's hard. I've run a lot of financial models in my life, but I was a generalist. I wasn't a home developer. It's really important that when we're making these decisions that we have people at the table who've actually built a pro forma and tried to get materials and get entitlements and all that kind of stuff, because it is complicated. And I think that's something that we could, as communities, do a better job of.
Mark is really adept and able to translate that at the local and state level. And, in Raleigh too, he's really helped us bridge those gaps because it's complicated, right? And not everyone has taken Mark's course at UNC or an underwriting course or, understands financial modeling, including myself. I have a lot to learn. And I think having experts, just knowing that you need to reach out and call someone or find someone who can help you understand those things, I think is a really big part of it too. So call Mark. He can help you. That's my plug.
We all love to call Mark.
Do you have a bat signal in Raleigh? Like when you're the Shelburne signal?
Mark, we need you. Gregg, you mentioned telling people that are not brand new to housing or affordable housing that they don't need to read your book. But Mark and I just came off of the WAHN Summit where he did have a LIHTC 101, the things that you think you knew about LIHTC but didn't know. And so they talk a lot about the tax credit. But we are finding there's so many people within sectors of affordable housing that, again, it's very siloed. And so somebody on the development side has no idea what HOTMA is. And the vocabulary has a life of its own. And so I think that your book is still very helpful to those in the industry to understand how the industry works together as a whole and allows that information to flow to the people who may not have it. So, I think it's good just to encourage people to pick it up and see what they can learn that they might not know already.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And to follow up on that, I think also when people are sitting there working on the voucher program every day, they may know that inside and out, but they may not understand, how do we end up here? What was the historical trajectory and the decisions that we made as a nation that then centered vouchers as a really important role in that? And so hopefully that can provide some context that people may not appreciate if they're just trying to get people into housing every day.
Question for both of you. We can start with Emila. Is what is one policy or program that you think holds real promise for tackling housing instability in the next 5 years?
To tackle homelessness right now, the biggest thing we need to be a proponent of and spreading and sharing the gospel of is direct to housing models, is providing housing to people living unsheltered, people experiencing homelessness with support services. And kind of hearkening back to Angie's point too about seeing people as people who are experiencing homelessness, we all need supports in some way to stay in our jobs, in our lives, be able to pay a mortgage, be able to pay our rent. Like, I have a primary care physician. That person helps to keep me healthy. I have therapists I speak with. I have supports in place with my family and friends that help keep me where I need to be. And so everyone needs those things. And so being able to provide someone with the basic human need, which is housing, so that then they can build all of their health on top of that is just key. So again, that direct to housing model is really important. And again, it's the cheapest way to do it. It's the best way. It's the cheapest way. We've got to keep spreading that.
I don't think I could provide a better answer than that. So I will just say +1 on Emila's response.
Yeah, and I'll say amen. And the other thing I would add is ending exclusionary zoning, since every local government could do that at their next council meeting if they so chose.
Yeah. Well, you didn't ask for 10. Otherwise, we would have gotten into all the...
For both of you. So we'll start with Emila. How can networks like WAHN support what you're doing or amplify the work that you're doing to help change the narrative?
Yeah, I think just keep doing what you're doing. I think the work that WAHN does is incredibly important. I know it is to me. And I think just continue to uplift local evidence-based, innovative work, continue to educate on what real solutions are and what evidence-based solutions are. So yeah, just keep doing all the incredible work you all do. I think the education piece is just key and really great.
I agree. I think, we take seriously, and I'm sure Mark does at UNC as well, the burden and opportunity of training and educating the next generation. And I think affordable housing, and frankly, real estate generally, is a fairly closed community. It's not the easiest thing to break into. And in Seattle, real estate and housing development it's a bunch of white guys running around. And I've heard from many people that it's been tough for women and folks who aren't from the Pacific Northwest to break in. So I do think providing a network and providing relationships and access to students who have an interest in this is a huge benefit. And because it's complicated, it can be, I think, fairly intimidating. Like, where do I start on this? Because all these acronyms, I don't even know what all the acronyms are. So I do think kind of this basic education, connecting people with mentors, providing educational opportunities either through podcasts or speakers or whatever is a huge benefit. And more people we have in this field, the better. I say to my students, I was like, I know it's painful, but if you can learn how to do a tax credit deal, you will have employment for life. And so, because we just need folks who can do that. It's such a specialized, unique skill. So those would be my general thoughts.
Wanted to add to Gregg's great comments, where a lot of this can come together on more and more campuses are the chapters that we're forming on colleges for WAHN. And so I don't know the number we're up to now. It's 8, 9, 10, something like that. It's just going to keep growing, I hope. And so, question for both of you. Again, start with Emila. What is giving you hope right now in the housing and homelessness space?
So much, street outreach workers, peer support workers, residents, caseworkers, all my incredible staff that truly believe in this work, elected officials who believe in this work and fight for it every day, our local leadership, our county partners. I think just what gives me hope is all of those folks who are exhausted, but still show up every day and believe in this and know how important it is and are working every day to make housing a reality for so many people. And Gregg's research gives me hope, right? Because it gives me the tools and the knowledge I need to be able to do my work. And so many of us need to be able to do our work.
Well, thank you, Emila. I appreciate that. For sure, the people who are doing this work every day give me absolute hope, and I'm humbled by their efforts. This is really, really hard work. I always say, I get to fly around talking about it. I mean, these are folks who are doing it every day. I just got home late last night from Columbus, Ohio. I had a series of talks in Columbus, and what I said to folks there was, what gives me hope is showing up in a city, you don't know who I am, and there's 300-400 people who are there to learn about homelessness. And so what that says to me is, I describe in policymaking, apathy is the enemy of progress. We don't have an apathy problem. People are engaged. They might be angry. They might be pissed off. They might be crying because they're sad. Whatever it is, if you are feeling engaged on this and you're showing up, that's a really good thing. And so converting apathy to action is hard. We have passionate people who are engaged. Now we can convert that to action. And so it's an asset. It's hard to put a dollar value or quantify it in some way, but it's a huge asset that people are engaged and interested in this topic. And I see this city after city after city after city, which is to a certain extent kind of sad. I wish it weren't the case. But what's happening is this is becoming a big issue everywhere and people are engaged. And so let's convert that engagement into action and progress. And we know how to do it, as Emila said.
Gregg, when I saw you in Chicago a couple of springs ago, what you closed with was, we can solve homelessness in our lifetimes. And I've never heard anyone say that, but obviously your data backs that up. What Emila is doing backs that up, which is a nice segue into our closeout question. If you could share one call to action for listeners to change all of the good emotion that everybody's got behind this and energy behind it into something actionable, what call to action would you guys give out?
Well, this one gets back to, because I ignored Mark's point on land use, I'm going to hit it on this one. What I say to folks is you should clearly vote. Who you elect matters, but arguably an even more important impact is showing up on Tuesday night when the Planning Commission or the City Council is talking about allowing multifamily housing to be built. Not even affordable. I mean, that too. But the point is we get people showing up, and research says who shows up on Tuesday night? It's people who look like me. They're 50 years and older, they're white, and they're single-family homeowners. And I joke that they got nothing better to do on Tuesday night except show up and say no to multifamily housing. And because so few people show up, a very small group of very, very privileged people, the whole system has been built to benefit those folks. And they show up and say no, and then we don't end up with 200 units. And we do that over and over and over again, and it just becomes a huge challenge. And so what I say to folks is, until we figure out a better way of thinking about civic engagement, if you have the luxury of showing up on Tuesday night, do it, because the bang for your buck, the impact of that hour and a half, whatever, is massive.
I can't say it better. That's my answer as well, is advocate for housing. Advocate for housing however and wherever you possibly can, with your neighbors, with your family, with your friends, at your council meetings. Advocate for housing.
Thank you both so much. This is a meaty topic and obviously a critical one. So we appreciate you spending your afternoon with us and for all of the work that you do. It's incredible that both of you guys are so devoted and have spent so much time and energy making the world a better place for people. And we're lucky to have you both.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And just one last shout out to Mark. I'm only here because of Mark. Mark has been such a huge factor and influence in my career and in my life and all the work I do. So I just have to say that kind of mentorship, going back to what Gregg talked about, that's what Mark does. And it's incredible. Also, I don't have to say it again and again, but the work that Gregg does, it's incredibly important to everything we do. And without it, I don't think we would be here. I don't think that without Gregg having written this book, I would be able to be doing the work that I'm doing. So I just want to say, and Angie, I'm excited to know you, and I hope we can continue to stay in touch, because I know the work you do is incredible as well and super important. So just closing that gratitude circle. Thank you so much.
Well, and Emila, I obviously love Mark to pieces and learned about you because he shouted you out on a Novogradic podcast. And I was, he is the consummate ally to women in the industry and just to everybody in the industry, is always looking to help and spread the word and amplify other people's voices. And so I'm always grateful to Mark for everything, but especially for the introduction to you and the work that you're doing. Mark, you need to give a speech now.
Y'all are just all way too kind. So thank you. I don't even know what to say.
Thanks, everybody, very much.